Yeah, this is that lawyer anime everyone's been talking about. I pretty much had to watch and review this one. Anyway, in the eternal words of Judge Mills Lane, let's get it on. Wizard Barristers is about Pseudo Cecil, the youngest wizard barrister ever, who became a wizard barrister in order to reopen the case against her mother, who was sentenced to life for a murder she did not commit. The series begins with Cecil joining a defense firm with some crafty old lawyers and some slutty young paralegals. She takes on a bunch of cases defending wizards, and in the process of doing so, is often forced to use her own wizard powers, which is generally against the law. Turns out this is all part of a vast conspiracy to force Cecil to develop her own powers for a satanic ritual. But before getting into all that, I'd like to take a look at the law in this series. Now obviously this is a fictional legal system, however I imagine it's based in large part off the Japanese legal system, which is in large part based off the Anglo-American legal system. The first thing that got everyone's panties in a bunch was the fact that death sentences were carried out immediately upon conviction right in the courtroom. Everyone was like, "Oh, what about the appeals process? This isn't fair." Believe it or not, this did not bother me at all. Now, if it happened in the real world, that would be a different story. But in fiction, we've seen this concept before. In fact, the exact same thing happens in the Dresden Files, summary execution of wizard violators. This is not a new concept. The first episode also features a pretty legit explanation of consent searches and probable cause when Cecil gets pulled over for a traffic violation. I was definitely impressed with that, but at the same time, I didn't expect that level of legal discourse to continue on throughout the show. For the most part, I was right. In a later episode, they do bring up the exigent circumstances exception for warrantless searches, but aside from that, there isn't much legit law in this show. That isn't to say that the show doesn't give realistic depictions of the legal world in other ways. For example, Cecil aced her way through law school and turns out she has no clue what she's doing in the real world. That, unfortunately, is 100% realistic. Another thing that's actually quite realistic about this show is that the judges kept bitching about her clothing. Some judges are pretty cool about this, but many actually will get on your case about what you wear to the courtroom. It's pretty funny when feminists pick up on this once in a while and throw a tantrum, then they realize that the code is actually much stricter on men, and they sort of waddle away. As for things on the show that were unrealistic, I found them more amusing than disappointing. For example, in one particular scene, you have a Supreme Court justice who's essentially giving an advisory opinion. That's kind of unconstitutional in the United States. In many places around the world, of course it's not, but you know what? This is TV. Let's go for it. You have the prosecution resting first in a criminal case. That's not how it works in the US, but perhaps that's the way it should be. You have lawyers who are making arguments during cross-examination in addition to asking questions. In American trials, this is absolutely objectionable and will be sustained 100% of the time. Personally, I find attorney statements during cross-examination to be really annoying, but on TV, it makes for good drama. The one thing I will call the show out on is the final trial, in which they either forget or ignore who's supposed to be the prosecution and who's supposed to be the defense. It's a total train wreck. I'd say the best thing the show has going for it is the supporting cast. Aside from the 17-year-old Cecil, who talks in the third person, you're dealing with adults here who look like adults and talk like adults. My favorite character would be the lawyer who is an old-school tsundere. You know, the kind of tsundere who doesn't flip back and forth between hot and cold, but starts out cold and then throughout the course of the show warms up. My other favorite is Moyo, who is a fun, mysterious character to the very end. Another minor gem in this show is Cecil's English. Now, she's half Canadian, which automatically makes her English a bit funny, but throw in a Japanese voice actor and you're guaranteed at least one good line in each episode. You also gotta like the show for being unique. I mean, finally, it's about time someone made a lawyer anime, and hopefully this will pave the way for another lawyer anime to come, preferably one featuring Crimean Attorney General and adult strike witch, Natalia Poklonskaya. My biggest complaint about the show is that it tries to do way too much, which is kind of funny since these days I'm usually criticizing shows for doing way too little. With the show being called Wizard Barristers, of course you have to have the wizard element along with the attorney element. But on top of that, having Cecil being the chosen one and having to awaken her powers and having to summon these giant robots, it just gets unwieldy, especially given that it's only 12 episodes long. I wouldn't mind seeing this series run for 24 episodes and seeing those other 12 episodes just being devoted to regular casework. My other big criticism is the animation during episode 11, particularly during some of the climactic scenes. I don't know exactly what happened, I'm assuming they ran over their animation budget, but the animation was absolutely atrocious. They could not have picked a worse time to mail it in. Finally, they never explained the purpose of familiars on this show. There was really no point to them except to give a perverted frog the voice of Norio Wakamoto. All things considered, this was an entertaining show, but it was not without significant flaws. Final grade, single plus. There you have it, probably the only lawyer anime you will get to see for another decade. Of course, whenever the next one comes out, I'll be happy to review that one too. As for next time, I do have a non-anime post coming up. See you then.